欢迎收看本期华尔街网报。现在是2023年7月2日，我们为您带来来自全球媒体的最新消息以及评论分析。7月1日前夕，政治局于6月30日下午进行了第6次集体学习，主题是开辟马克思主义中国化时代化新境界。根据新华社发布的内容，中共总书记习近平在会上强调，不能抛弃马克思主义这一核心，不能抛弃中华优秀传统文化这一根基。忘记了历史终将导致失去核心和根本的颠覆性错误。据报道，习近平表示，中共能够在革命、建设、改革各个历史时期取得重大成就，并领导人民完成中国其他政治力量不可能完成的艰巨任务。习近平强调，中国共产党为什么能够，中国特色社会主义为什么好，归根到底是马克思主义型，是中国化时代化的马克思主义型。习近平说，我们绝不能抛弃马克思主义这一核心，绝不能抛弃中华优秀传统文化这一根基。坚守好这个核心和根基是理论创新的基础和前提。理论创新必须说新话，但不能丢了老祖宗，忘记了根基就等于割断了核心和根本，最终会犯失去核心和根本的颠覆性错误。习近平还说，在两个大局加速演进并深度互动的背景下，各领域面临一系列新的重大问题，新考题比过去更复杂、更困难。再来关注由清华大学主办、中国人民外交学会协办的非官方年度国际安全论坛世界和平论坛。据官方通报，中共中央对外联络部部长刘建超在论坛午餐会上谈及当前中美关系时表示，中美双方共同利益和责任没有变。据报道，针对世界和平论坛现场观众就当前中美关系陷入困难提问，刘建超回应称，在冷战时期，中美两国领导人展现了大智慧，做出了正确的决定，实现了两国关系正常化。他指出，时代发生了变化，中美两国也发生了变化，但是当你想要发展一个互惠关系时，应该更强调一点，就是事情没有变的地方。刘建超进一步表示，中美之间的共同利益没有变，两国过去的积极互动对两国人民和国际社会都带来了很多益处，力量的平衡、互惠合作、对世界经济的支持和贡献，这些都推动人类文明不断进步。他强调，如今还应该继续强调，不能追寻单边优势或是一味寻求自身优势，把另一方搁置在一边。此外，刘建超还认为，第二个没有变的是责任。现在中国大陆的影响力在不断增强，尤其是在国际事务上，美国则仍是世界上唯一的超级大国。他重申，大陆、美国和其他国家有着共同责任，就是要为各国民众带来更美好的世界。对此，刘建超特别说道，走错路、制定错误的决策，对于全人类来说都是毁灭性的。他提醒美国的这些决策者，我希望他们能够冷静地看到这一点，也就是到底什么对中美两国，什么对世界才是有益的。稍早之前，大陆国家副主席韩正也出席了该论坛开幕式并致辞。韩正表示，当前全球安全秩序面临诸多挑战，大国之间的竞争和冲突加剧，全球应推动包容互惠、互利共享，全球发展迈向平衡、协调的新阶段，来巩固世界和平的社会基础。另外，韩正还特别提到，在当前世界经济复苏动力不足的情况下，开放合作更是各国的迫切需要，单边主义、保护主义没有出路，去风险不合作才是最大的风险。再来关注法国大抗议最新进展。法国巴黎南部城镇拉伊莱罗斯的市长尚布伦今天表示，暴乱分子开车冲进他的住所，导致他的妻子和其中一名孩子受伤。据法新社报道，尚布伦在推特上表示，在他和家人熟睡后，抗议者先是开车冲进他的家中，接着放火。尚布伦写道，昨晚，恐怖和不光彩的行为达到了一个里程碑。这起事件发生在法国掀起暴动的第5晚。此前，非裔青少年奈尔在巴黎郊区因开车拒绝服从路边拦检，遭警察开枪射杀后，暴乱分子纵火焚烧车辆，攻击基础设施，并与安全部队发生冲突。尚布伦指控，我的妻子和其中一个孩子受伤了，这是出于无法形容的懦弱所做出的企图谋杀行为。此前，据南华早报消息，一辆满载中国游客的巴士在马赛遭到抗议者袭击后，北京向法国游客发出安全警报。分析指出，骚乱以及欧洲国家签证的长队可能会阻止中国游客在严格的疫情措施后最近恢复世界旅行。中国驻马赛总领馆对袭击事件作出回应，并帮助乘客返回中国。中国驻法国大使馆已建议中国公民避免前往有抗议和暴力冲突的地区，并在旅行时做好预防措施。最后看到中国知名偶像艺人蔡徐坤负面新闻的后续进展。北京广告协会明星代言规范工作委员会旗下微信公众号明星代言规范委在星期六深夜发布通知。这项内容简短的通知称，近日中国内地男歌手蔡某某事件逐渐发酵，该事件有进一步炒作及扩大趋势， 请相关品牌方、演艺经纪公司、MCN 经纪机构对中国内地男歌手蔡某某做好风险把控。通知没有表明蔡某某的身份，不过网络舆论大多都认为蔡某某指的就是蔡徐坤。此前，明星代言规范委星期五曾发布题为《蔡徐坤的事情让我们思考了什么》的文章，称如何提高危机公关及个人宣传能力是需要文艺人思考的。文章说，万事万物皆相生相克，初有成绩的文艺人及经纪团队若不敬畏因果、敬畏规则，高位时做出任何失实与错位的动作，最后将高飞必坠，黯然收场。文章也写道，如何躲开那些破事，做有价值的事，以高级的方式走自己的路，像杨荧光的发现美，还是需要文艺人思考的。有网民此前爆料，指一名女子在2021年与蔡徐坤发生一夜情，1个月后怀孕。蔡徐坤得知此事后，让该名女子堕胎。蔡徐坤的母亲认为此女有意设圈套敲诈，并雇人对女子进行跟踪，在其家门口安装针孔摄影机，被发现后闹到了派出所进行调解。相关话题连日来多次登上微博热搜榜，但蔡徐坤本人或者经纪公司至今都没有做出回应。公开资料显示，蔡徐坤现年24岁，2018年从中国首档偶像男团竞演养成类真人秀偶像练习生出道。最后再来关注这一时段其他要闻。俄罗斯荒唐的兵变对中国和伊朗来说是致命的。来自彭博社观点，最近俄罗斯叶夫根尼·普里戈任领导的兵变暴露了总统弗拉基米尔·普京的国内权力基础受到侵蚀。这次兵变表明普里戈任短暂控制了罗斯托夫市，并向莫斯科派遣武装部队，这表明普京军事领导人之间的分歧，以及普通俄罗斯民众对克里姆林宫缺乏恐惧。本文认为，俄罗斯危机凸显了包括中国和伊朗在内的独裁政权所面临的内部问题。此外，民主国家也可能容易受到内部危机的影响，例如美国的未遂政变以及印度和匈牙利的非自由民主国家。作者认为，世界目前正在经历一个类似于17世纪的时期，权力从国家转移回私人企业实体。互联网的兴起和大型科技公司的主导地位，以及私人军事行动者的出现，让人想起印刷机和私人贸易公司在17世纪的作用。文章的结论是，世界剧离华伦斯坦之死比威斯特伐利亚诞生更近，这表明以加强国家主权和对暴力控制为特征的新威斯特伐利亚时刻可能还需要一段时间。纽约时报，随着锂矿竞争加剧，西方汽车制造商正在与锂矿开采公司达成协议，以确保供应。随着电动汽车销量的上升，成熟的矿业公司没有足够的锂来供应该行业。电池原材料必须在北美或贸易盟友开采和加工，才能从美国补贴中受益。但对锂的激烈竞争已导致锂价格上涨至不可持续的水平。汽车制造商需要直接获取金属，并将其送往电池工厂。汽车公司不敢冒险，担心如果几年没有足够的锂，他们的公司将永远无法赶上。在电动汽车销量增长最快的地区，老牌汽车制造商已经失去了很大的市场份额。日本时报，日本首相岸田文雄将于下周出席在立陶宛维尔纽斯举行的北约领导人峰会，寻求与北约更密切的合作，以扩大日本的安全参与。预计岸田将强调日本与北约合作在确保印度太平洋地区安全方面的重要性，特别是中国和朝鲜构成的地区安全威胁。预计日本还将与北约签订一项新的伙伴关系协议，称为 ITPP。ITPP 将为北约合作伙伴提供与北约军队发展互操作性的机会，以及参与和共享安全问题信息的平台。包括韩国、澳大利亚和新西兰在内的亚太4国预计也将与北约建立更深入的伙伴关系。日本将与北约更密切的合作视为加强威慑、建立更紧密的战略关系和互操作性，以及在跨大西洋和印度太平洋地区的美国联盟之间架起桥梁的一种方式。还在考虑在东京设立北约亚太办事处。欢迎收看本期华尔街网报，现在是2023年7月2日，我们为您带来来自全球媒体的最新消息以及评论分析。首先来看彭博社的报道，潘功胜周6被任命为中国人民银行党组书记，这表明央行将继续保持现状，与其最近的做法一致，仅仅略微降息，并鼓励银行向目标领域提供更多贷款。近几周来，随着数据继续显示经济增长放缓，政府面临对更大刺激措施的呼吁。然而，他的任命留下了关于中国人民银行在习近平改组监督金融系统的高层人员中所扮演角色的关键问题。潘功胜去年未能进入中国共产党中央委员会， 央行前任郭树清曾担任该职位。周六，郭树清退休并辞去党内职务，而现任中国人民银行行长易纲则辞去央行党委副书记职务。华尔街日报早些时候报道称，潘功胜还将担任行长职务，该职位由政府单独任命，这将使央行恢复近几十年来同时由一人担任的2个最高职务的常态。潘功胜相对较低的党内职位可能导致中国人民银行在高层经济决策中的影响力较小，经济学家表示。他说，当然，系统在这个层面上基本上是一个黑盒子，所以潘功胜不在中央委员会上并不清楚会有多大影响。彭博经济学首席经济学家表示，就当前政策前景而言，潘功胜是内部人士，高债务和产能过剩的结构性压力限制了中国人民银行的调控空间，需要在重大政策转变上获得共识，这意味着连续性是最好的选择。与美国的联邦储备系统和欧洲的中央银行不同，中国人民银行并非独立运作，它负责向国务院征得批准后进行重大政策决策，如设置利率或管理货币。澳大利亚格里菲斯大学高级讲师、中国人民银行崛起的合著者表示，在习近平的第3个任期内，该行不太可能在宏观经济决策中发挥重要的引领作用，而将更多成为技术顾问。潘功胜面临的首要挑战是他近期专长的领域——人民币。除了自2012年以来担任央行副行长外，他还于2016年担任中国外汇管理局局长，监管着中国3万亿美元的外汇储备。在易纲的领导下，中国人民银行将其利率体系转变为更具市场化的体系，虽然它仍然拥有一些工具，但不再正式干预货币。央行在上周承诺加大努力稳定人民币，此前人民币接近15年来的最低水平。与大多数中国官员一样，潘功胜在公众关注度较高时通常会坚守官方立场。据当地媒体报道，他在2017年的一次活动中发表了更有活力的言论，当时北京正在打击加密货币。据他说，他表示，如果你坐在河边观看，总有一天比特币的尸体会飘到你面前。作为中国人民银行副行长，潘功胜一直是管理中国曾经蓬勃发展的房地产市场的负责人。2020年，他被认为是引入了所谓的3条红线政策的推动者，这是一套旨在控制中国恒大集团等高负债开发商的监管措施。今年房地产市场的复苏被证明是短暂的，有关部门正在考虑刺激措施，如降低现有抵押贷款的成本。在加入中国人民银行之前，潘功胜负责一些中国最大国有银行的首次公开募股，包括中国农业银行等。金融监管机构的最新重组意味着中国人民银行可能更多地关注与货币政策和金融稳定相关的职责，而新的监管机构将接管金融控股公司等职能。再来看到路透社的消息，一位中国高级外交官表示，尽管意大利正考虑退出备受争议的一带一路倡议，但他认为意大利仍然支持习近平主席的这一全球投资倡议。刘建超表示，就我个人而言，我认为意大利在一带一路倡议的概念可能带来的结果以及推动沿线合作方面是基本一致的。他说，他们只是在考虑是否续签协议。刘建超在上周返回中国之后发表了这番言论。他在意大利会见了政界人士、议员和智库，试图说服该国继续支持习近平的旗舰全球计划。他在罗马向一群商界人士表示，两国签署一带一路是一个正确的决定。意大利在2019年时加入了中国的一带一路倡议，成为唯一一个加入该倡议的7国集团国家。据彭博社报道，意大利现任领导人乔尔吉亚·梅洛尼支持退出这一基础设施倡议，除非罗马退出协议，否则参与资格将在2024年自动续约。刘建超在北京清华大学举办的一场和平论坛期间对彭博社表示，当然，我们希望意大利能续签协议，但同时我也认为众议之间的合作可以通过各种方式进行。他的言论似乎比中国驻罗马大使的言论更为谨慎。中国驻罗马大使在接受意大利新闻媒体采访时警告说，如果罗马鲁莽决定退出，将会产生负面后果。梅洛尼在周3告诉议员，即使意大利不参与这一倡议，也可以与中国保持良好关系。他说，我们正在进行评估，这个问题必须谨慎和尊重地处理，还必须涉及到议会。再来看到《华尔街日报》的独家报道，在圣彼得堡，瓦格纳集团封闭的玻璃塔总部内，来自联邦安全局的特工正在办公室里搜寻针对上个月发动叛乱的瓦格纳首领叶甫根尼·普里戈金的证据。新的克里姆林宫支持的军事承包商正在俄罗斯社交媒体网络上展开招募活动，发布招聘广告，试图挖走瓦格纳的3万名雇佣兵、黑客和资金家。这些人是普京总统的长期盟友，被派往乌克兰、中东和非洲。 在圣彼得堡各地，俄罗斯执法部门扣押了普里戈金的爱国者媒体集团的计算机和服务器。该集团曾是一个传媒帝国的关键组成部分，旗下曾包括互联网研究机构。这是一个在社交媒体平台上发布数百万亲克里姆林宫信息，在2016年美国总统选举中制造混乱的组织。这些信息和短信经《华尔街日报》审核后得知，信息显示，爱国者媒体的可能新拥有者是由阿琳娜·卡巴耶娃担任主席的国家媒体集团。阿琳娜·卡巴耶娃是一位被美国政府认为是普京至少3个孩子的母亲的节奏体操运动员，她受到了华盛顿的制裁。自从英国王室于1858年开始清算东印度公司，并直接统治其遍布全球的殖民地以来，世界上就没有看到过任何一个政府试图吞并类似瓦格纳这样的企业帝国。瓦格纳集团帮助克里姆林宫积累国际影响力和收入，所有这些都由普里戈金的主要控股公司康科德管理。根据西方、中东和非洲官员以及俄罗斯的叛逃者和详细列出100多家由瓦格纳控制的公司的文件，普京现在正试图控制他曾经帮助创立的一个企业巨头。6月24日，克里姆林宫封锁了瓦格纳集团和康科德的社交媒体渠道。安全机构已对康科德的几个子公司进行了突击搜查，他们表示发现了手枪、假护照，详细列有数百家公司的图表，相当于4800万美元的现金和金条。再来看到这一时段的其他要闻。被法国警察杀害的青少年的祖母恳求停止骚乱。来自法国国际广播电台。一名在法国被一名警察开枪打死的17岁男孩的祖母呼吁在持续的抗议和暴力事件中保持冷静。这位祖母只被确认为内迪亚，他对杀死他孙子的警官表示愤怒，但没有对一般的警察表示愤怒。他还表示相信司法系统。暴力事件是由对前法国殖民地人民的歧视的愤怒引发的。周六晚上似乎有所减少，但法国内政部表示将部署45000名警察来应对进一步的骚乱。总统埃马纽埃尔·马克龙周日晚上举行了一次特别安全会议。据报道，周六晚上共逮捕了719人。暴力事件导致数百名警察和消防员受伤。此外，巴黎郊区市长的家和家人成为抗议者的目标，市长的妻子和孩子在袭击中受伤。彭斯称拜登将习近平称为独裁者，事实陈述来自国会山报。前副总统麦克·彭斯同意拜登总统将中国总统习近平描述为独裁者的说法，称其为事实陈述。这与前总统特朗普形成鲜明对比。特朗普称赞习近平是一个聪明人。彭斯还表示，美国应向乌克兰提供必要的支持，以击退俄罗斯的入侵，并建议对中国可能入侵台湾采取威慑政策。中央情报局抓住削弱普京的机会，招募俄罗斯间谍。来自英国《每日电讯》。中央情报局局长威廉·伯恩斯表示，美国正在利用被削弱的普京在俄罗斯境内招募间谍。伯恩斯表示，俄罗斯内部对普京政权及其入侵乌克兰感到的耻辱创造了一个难得的机会。他补充说，对乌克兰战争的不满将继续削弱俄罗斯领导层，美国不会让这个机会白白浪费。伯恩斯还强调了来自中国对全球稳定的长期威胁，称中国有重塑国际秩序的意图和力量。
Good afternoon, Lords, ladies and gentlemen. It's fantastic to have you here physically here at
James, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this, our 59th annual lecture. It's wonderful to see you all here, with Ditchley looking its best, drawing together old friends and new, helping us to think new thoughts and make new connections, just as our founder, Sir David Wills, had always envisaged. But as we've been gathering beforehand, there is, of course, one old friend whom we sorely miss this year, Catherine Wills, who died too young last September. And in her quiet, shy, but very determined way, Catherine was our guiding spirit for over 20 years. And there was never any fuss or nonsense with Catherine, but she was always there, ready with a thoughtful touch on the tiller, encouraging and supporting us all. Ditchley gave her such great pleasure, and I know that she was really proud to see it flourish in recent years under the leadership of our director, James Arroyo. Indeed, it was her confidence in James that helped shape her final act of encouragement and support for Ditchley, the extraordinarily generous bequest she left us in her will. And in her mischievous way, not long before she died, she said to James that she would be leaving Ditchley a little something. Well, the little something turned out not to be little at all. In fact, it turned out to be rather a big something. So big indeed that it amounts to a second founding of Ditchley. And I think amongst ourselves we used to talk of Catherine as carrying on her father's work. Now, because of the extent of her generosity, we need to think of Ditchley as equally being Catherine's work. So it's now our responsibility, supported by Catherine's cousin Rob Wills as the new family trustee, to take forward Catherine's vision for Ditchley. And I'm sure that today of all days, her spirit is sitting here with us in the front row. And on behalf of everyone here, Catherine, thank you for all you did for Ditchley. Now, what is so exciting about her legacy is that it will enable us to build on the strong foundations that James has already helped to put down. This year, we've been strengthening our ties with American and Canadian Ditchley, which continue to give us generous support. And a very warm welcome to our American friends who are here today in strong numbers. Our new European venture, Ditchley Deutschland, about which we are extremely excited, is up and running and had its first conference last week in Frankfurt. So I think that at this time of complexity and change, Ditchley is proving its worth, the antidote we need to short-termism and performative politics. And here we're doing more, better in our programme, with our networks, with our technology, and of course in all the work going on in the House that I hope some of you will have seen. So on behalf of the Ditchley Council of Management, I'd like to thank James and Kerry and the whole team here at Ditchley for all that they do as we prepare for the even more ambitious phase that lies ahead. So if here we like to think that we stand for seriousness and the desire to build understanding, there is no one who has better illustrated those values in their career than Director Bill Burns, whom I'm delighted to welcome today. Or perhaps I should say welcome back, since he is no stranger to Ditchley, or indeed to Oxford, where he studied as a Marshall Scholar. Now, Bill has already, in my view, fulfilled the most crucial task of any annual lecturer. He's turned up, which, given the events of last week in Russia, didn't seem at all certain at points during this week. And it's particularly nice that he's been joined by his wife, Ambassador Lisa Carty, who is the US representative to the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, and I'd like to welcome her too to Ditchley. So, garlanded with honours, indeed the highest honours that the American diplomatic service can bestow, Bill held the highest rank in the Foreign Service, Career Ambassador, that it is possible to hold. He was only the second career diplomat in the history to become the Deputy Secretary of State, and when he left the Foreign Service in 2014, he became President of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Then, 2021, he was recalled to the colours as Director of the CIA, the first ever career diplomat to hold that office. With such a career, such a record, I obviously felt it was my duty to try to find a dissenting voice, maybe some compromise, I think it's called. So in the best traditions of the CIA, I thought I'd try to acquire some intel from the diplomatic community, as we all know, a cynical, jaded and competitive bunch. Who better to dish the dirt than the kind of people who come to Ditchley? So after a bit, my sources started to come back to me with their reports. The most remarkable thing about Bill, said the first one, is that it is impossible to find a foreign minister who has other than high regard for him. From a very senior diplomat he is my favourite diplomat and the best of his generation. From another source, he is not someone to be trifled with. He's an incredibly nice guy, but beneath that, he is tough and determined. One person sent me a quote from former Secretary of State James Baker, who described Bill as simply one of the finest US diplomats of the last half century. And that person said, "Yup, that is the Bill Burns I know." They also told me his father once wrote Bill a letter saying, "Nothing can make you prouder than serving your country with honour." That, they said, exemplifies Bill in my mind. So you can see I failed comprehensively on the compromat. And I know that even the Iranians and Russians regard him with great respect. One other thing struck me about the people who wrote endorsements for Bill's memoir, The Back Channel, available at all good bookshops. 7 former Secretaries of State, Kissinger, Baker, Shultz, Rice, Albright, Kerry and Clinton, all endorsed the book. But most importantly to me, that was across the political divide. And in today's polarising world, it was a sign not just of the very high regard in which Bill is held, but a refreshing reminder that things can be different, as we know here at Ditchley. Now, Bill speaks Russian, Arabic and French. As a special concession to me, he's kindly agreed to talk to us today in his 4th language, English. With his background and experience, his deep personal knowledge of the situation in Russia and Ukraine, it is not hyperbole to say that there really is no one better placed than he to talk to us on the theme of a world transformed and the role of intelligence. There is certainly no one we would rather have here with us today at Ditchley, and so it is with great pleasure that I invite Director Burns to give us this year's annual lecture.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for that very kind introduction and for welcoming me back to Ditchley. I first came here in 1979 as a young and unformed Marshall Scholar at Oxford with just enough cash to rent a black tie for the formal conference dinner and buy a bus ticket. I must admit that my memory of the conference itself is hazy, but the effect it had on me was profound. It gave me an enduring appreciation of the power and purpose of the transatlantic alliance and of the particular significance of Anglo-American partnership. A decade later, I was a career American diplomat working for Secretary of State James Baker. It was one of those rare plastic moments in history, moments which come along only a few times each century. The Cold War was ending, the Soviet Union was about to collapse, Germany would soon be reunified, and Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait would soon be defeated. It was a world of uncontested American primacy. History's currents seemed to flow inexorably in our direction, the power of our ideas driving the rest of the world in a slow but irresistible surge toward democracy and free markets. Our sometimes overbearing self-assurance seemed well-grounded in the realities of power and influence, but it also obscured other gathering trends. Our moment of post-Cold War dominance was never going to be a permanent condition. History had not ended, nor had ideological competition. Globalization held great promise for human society, with hundreds of millions of people lifted out of poverty, but it was also bound to produce counter-pressures. In a transition memo that I drafted for the incoming Clinton administration at the end of 1992, I tried to capture the dim outlines of the challenges ahead. While for the first time in 50 years we do not face a global military adversary, I wrote, it is certainly conceivable that a return to authoritarianism in Russia or an aggressively hostile China could revive such a global threat. I tried, however imperfectly, to highlight the risks that democracies and free markets would inevitably face in a world in which economies were globalizing, but as I put it at the time, the international political system was tilting schizophrenically toward greater fragmentation. And I tried as best I could to sketch the shared global threats already posed by climate change and global health insecurity, especially the then raging HIV/AIDS epidemic. For the next quarter century, I remained a proud and very fortunate American diplomat, serving mostly in Russia and the Middle East and in senior positions in Washington. I shared in diplomatic successes and made my share of mistakes as America's unipolar moment faded and some of what I had tried to foresee in that long ago transition memo began to unfold. Today, as director of the Central Intelligence Agency, I'm afraid to say that I've now lived and served long enough to face another plastic moment in a world that is far more crowded, complicated, and contested than the one I experienced in those heady days as a young diplomat 3 decades ago. It is a world in which the United States is no longer the only big kid on the geopolitical block, a world in which humanity faces both peril and promise. My job now is to help President Biden and senior policymakers understand and shape a world transformed. So what I'd like to do this afternoon is sketch the main features of the new landscape before us and what it means for the role of intelligence. We are, as President Biden reminds us, at an inflection point. The post-Cold War era is definitely over. Our task is to shape what comes next, investing in our foundational strengths and working in common cause with our unmatched network of alliances and partnerships, to leave for future generations a world that is more free, open, secure, and prosperous. That is a very tall order. Our success will depend on our ability to navigate a world with 3 distinctive features. First is the challenge of strategic competition from a rising and ambitious China and from a Russia which constantly reminds us that declining powers can be at least as disruptive as rising ones. Second are the problems without passports, like the climate crisis and global pandemics, which are beyond the reach of any one country to address and are growing more extreme and existential. And third is the revolution in technology, which is transforming how we live, work, fight, and compete with possibilities and risks we can't yet fully grasp. Those singular challenges sometimes conflict with one another, with cooperation on shared global problems both more vital and more difficult, too often the victim of strategic competition. And the revolution in technology is both a main arena for that competition and a phenomenon in which some basic partnership is crucial to set rules of the road to maximize the benefits of emerging technologies and minimize their dangers. The most immediate and acute geopolitical challenge to international order today is Vladimir Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the biggest war in Europe since Winston Churchill sat in his bedroom here at Ditchley dictating wartime messages to Franklin Roosevelt. I've spent much of the past 2 decades trying to understand and counter the combustible combination of grievance, ambition, and insecurity that Putin embodies. That experience has not only contributed to all this gray hair, it has also given me a healthy dose of humility about pontificating about Putin and Russia. But one thing I have learned is that it is always a mistake to underestimate Putin's fixation on controlling Ukraine and its choices, without which he believes it is impossible for Russia to be a major power or him to be a great Russian leader. That tragic and brutish fixation has already brought shame to Russia and exposed its weaknesses, and evoked the breathtaking determination and resolve of the Ukrainian people. Putin often insists that Ukraine is not a real country, that it is weak and divided. Well, as he has discovered, real countries fight back. And that is what Ukrainians have done with remarkable courage and tenacity, as I've seen in frequent travels to Kyiv over the course of the war. They will not relent, nor will all of us who support Ukraine. Putin's war has already been a strategic failure for Russia. Its military weaknesses laid bare, its economy badly damaged for years to come, its future as a junior partner and economic colony of China being shaped by Putin's mistakes, its revanchist ambitions blunted by a NATO which has only grown bigger and stronger. This time last Saturday, we were all riveted by the scenes of Yevgeny Prigozhin's armed challenge to the Russian state, with Wagner paramilitary forces briefly seizing Rostov and moving 2/3 of the way to Moscow before turning back. As President Biden has made clear, this is an internal Russian affair in which the United States has had and will have no part. It is striking that Prigozhin preceded his actions with a scathing indictment of the Kremlin's mendacious rationale for the invasion of Ukraine and of the Russian military leadership's conduct of the war. The impact of those words and those actions will play out for some time, a vivid reminder of the corrosive effect of Putin's war on his own society and his own regime. Russia's aggression poses a formidable test, but China is the only country with both the intent to reshape the international order and increasingly the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to do so. China's transformation over the past 5 decades has been extraordinary. It is a transformation for which the Chinese people deserve the credit, and one which our country supported because, as Foreign Secretary Cleverly eloquently said in April at Mansion House, a stable, prosperous, and peaceful China is good for Britain and good for the world. The issue, therefore, is not China's rise per se, but the actions which accompany it. President Xi is embarking on his 3rd term with more power than any Chinese leader since Mao. And rather than use that power to reinforce, revitalize, and update the international system that enabled China's transformation, he seeks to rewrite it. In the intelligence profession, we study carefully what leaders say, but we pay special attention to what they do. And here, President Xi's growing repression at home and his aggressiveness abroad, from his no-limits partnership with Putin to his threats to peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, are impossible to ignore. What's also impossible to ignore is the fact that in this new era, our competition is taking place against the backdrop of thick economic interdependence and commercial ties. That has served our countries, our economies, and our world remarkably well. But it has also created strategic dependencies, critical vulnerabilities, and serious risks to our security and our prosperity. COVID made clear to every government the danger of being dependent on any one country for life-saving medical supplies, just as Putin's aggression in Ukraine has made clear to every government the risks of being dependent on one country for energy supplies. In today's world, no country wants to find itself at the mercy of a cartel of one for critical minerals and technologies, especially a country that has demonstrated the will and capacity to deepen and weaponize those dependencies. The answer to that is not to decouple from an economy like China's, which would be foolish, but to sensibly de-risk and diversify by securing resilient supply chains, protecting our technological edge, and investing in industrial capacity. In a more volatile and uncertain world in which power is more diffuse, the weight of the hedging middle is growing, economically, politically, and militarily. Democracies and autocracies, developed and developing economies, and countries from the global south and other parts of the globe are intent on diversifying their relationships in order to expand their strategic autonomy and maximize their options. These countries see little benefit and lots of risk in monogamous geopolitical relationships. Instead, we're likely to see more countries pursue more open relationships than we were accustomed to over several post-Cold War decades of unipolarity. And if past is precedent, we ought to be attentive to rivalries between so-called middle powers, which have often been the match that ignited collisions between major powers. We do not have the option of focusing on a single geopolitical pacing threat. We face an equal threat to international order and indeed to the lives and livelihoods of our people from shared or transnational challenges, of which the climate crisis poses the most clear and present danger. We can no longer talk about tipping points and catastrophic climate impacts in the future tense. They are here and now, imperiling our planet, our security, our economies, and our people. Last month in Washington, D.C., you could not see across the Potomac River from CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, or take a breath without subjecting your lungs to hazardous materials because of smoke from hundreds of wildfires across Canada. Climate change is the quintessential threat multiplier, fueling energy, health, water, and food insecurities, setting back our progress on economic and human development, turbocharging what is already the worst period of forced displacement and migration in history, and further exacerbating instability and geopolitical tensions and flashpoints. These two threats, geopolitical and transnational, are impossible to disentangle. We have to be honest, as I noted before. Competition in many ways makes cooperation more difficult, but we're going to have to do both. To outcompete our rivals and still deliver on shared challenges, our leaders will need to deal with another immensely powerful force, a revolution in technology more profound than the Industrial Revolution or the dawn of the nuclear age. Advances in computing-related technologies, from chips to quantum to artificial intelligence, are leading to breakthroughs of remarkable scale and scope. In just a few short months since the first public version of ChatGPT debuted last November, we've seen newer models outperform humans in graduate-level entrance exams and in assessments of doctor-to-patient engagements in medical training programs. We see this hockey stick trend line time and again, outstripping our expectations, our imaginations, and our capacity to govern the use of enormously powerful technologies, for good or for ill. Nowhere is that more evident than in biotechnology and biomanufacturing, which can unlock extraordinary climate and health solutions and boost our economies, but whose abuse and misuse could lead to catastrophe. Leadership in technology and innovation has underpinned our economic prosperity and military strength. It has also been critical to setting rules, norms, and standards that safeguard our interests and our values. Our Chinese rivals understand that as well as anyone, and it is therefore no surprise that they are investing heavily in emerging technologies as a central dimension of our strategic competition. Strategic competition, common transnational imperatives, and a revolution in technology without precedent in human history make for a hugely complicated international landscape. It certainly keeps my nostalgia for diplomacy and policymaking under control, but it also sharpens my focus on transforming how we approach the role of intelligence in this transformed world. Across the CIA and the U.S. intelligence community, we're working hard to meet this moment with the urgency and creativity it requires. Let me offer a few examples, from the challenges of strategic competition with Russia and China, to initiatives to harness emerging technologies, invest in the people who animate the CIA, and build the intelligence partnerships which will shape our future. I'm proud of the work that CIA and our partners across the U.S. intelligence community have done to help President Biden and senior policymakers, and especially Ukrainians themselves, thwart Vladimir Putin's aggression in Ukraine. And I'm proud of our close partnership with our British allies, in particular the women and men of the Secret Intelligence Service, led by my friend Sir Richard Moore, for whom I have the greatest respect. Together, we provided early and accurate warning of the war that was coming, the essential function of any intelligence service. When the president sent me to Moscow before the war in early November of 2021, I found Putin and his principal advisors unmoved by the clarity of our understanding of what he was planning, convinced that the window was closing for his opportunity to dominate Ukraine. I left even more troubled than when I arrived. Good intelligence has helped President Biden mobilize and sustain a strong coalition of countries in support of Ukraine. Good intelligence has helped Ukraine defend itself with such remarkable bravery and resolve, and to launch the crucial counteroffensive that is now underway. And the careful declassification of some of our secrets, part of a novel and effective strategy shaped by the president and senior policy officials, has helped deny Putin the false narratives that I have watched him so often invent in the past, putting him in the uncomfortable and unaccustomed position of being on his back foot. Disaffection with the war will continue to gnaw away at the Russian leadership beneath the steady diet of state propaganda and practiced repression. That disaffection creates a once-in-a-generation opportunity for us at CIA, at our core, a human intelligence service. We're not letting it go to waste. We recently used social media, our first video post to Telegram, in fact, to let brave Russians know how to contact us safely on the dark web. We had 2.5 million views in the first week, and we're very much open for business. If Putin's war in Ukraine is the most immediate challenge in strategic competition, Xi Jinping's China is our biggest geopolitical and intelligence rival and most significant long-term priority. We've been organizing ourselves at CIA over the past couple of years to reflect that priority. We've set up a new mission center, one of the dozen or so organizational building blocks of the agency, focused exclusively on China. It is the only single-country mission center we have at CIA, and it provides a central mechanism for coordinating work on the China mission, which extends today to every part of CIA. I learned long ago that priorities aren't real unless budgets follow them. That's why we've concentrated substantially more resources on intelligence collection, operations, and analysis on China, more than doubling the percentage of our overall budget supporting China activities over just the last 2 years. We're hiring and training more Mandarin speakers, and we're stepping up efforts across the world to compete with China, from Latin America to Africa to the Indo-Pacific. We've also sought to quietly strengthen intelligence channels with China, including through my own travels. These discrete channels are an important means of ensuring against unnecessary misunderstandings and inadvertent collisions, and complementing and supporting policymaking channels such as Secretary Blinken's recent visit to Beijing. Even as Russia and China consume much of our attention, we cannot afford to neglect other pressing challenges on today's new and complicated landscape, from counterterrorism to regional instability. Hardly a day goes by when I'm not reminded that CIA is an agency with global responsibilities and global reach. As we meet here this afternoon, our officers are doing hard jobs in hard places around the world, often operating in the shadows, out of sight and out of mind. The risks they take and the sacrifices they make rarely well understood. The successful U.S. strike last summer against Ayman al-Zawahiri, the co-founder and former leader of al-Qaeda, was a reminder of the capability and determination still focused on terrorist threats. For many years to come, we will have to perform a delicate balancing act, juggling renewed major power rivalry with all sorts of other challenges. Meanwhile, we're transforming our approach to emerging technology issues. We've created a second new mission center focused on technology and transnational challenges. It is already significantly expanding our partnerships with the private sector, without which we will not be able to keep pace with intelligence rivals like China or keep ahead of them. We've also established a new Chief Technology Officer position, a first for CIA, and CIA Labs, another new program, supports research and development in crucial technologies with academic and private sector partners. Our in-house talent remains superb. More than 60 years ago, CIA pioneered the technical collection capabilities of the U-2 reconnaissance aircraft. We were an early investor in the technology you now know as Google Earth. And our specialists also developed the precursors to the lithium-ion batteries that power your smartphones today. We're constantly looking for the next breakthrough. We're also in the midst of the most profound transformation of espionage tradecraft since the Cold War. In an era of smart cities and ubiquitous technical surveillance, spying is a formidable challenge. For a CIA officer working overseas in a hostile country, meeting sources who are risking their own safety to provide us information, constant surveillance is a very risky business. But the same technology that sometimes works against us, whether it's mining big data to expose patterns in our activities or massive camera networks, can also be made to work for us and against our rivals. Technical collection platforms are enormously important in today's intelligence world, but there will always be secrets we need a human to collect and clandestine operations that only a human can execute. That requires intensive training, an intensive team effort to support operations, and immense creativity and appetite for risk. It still, however, remains central to our mission. The ongoing revolution in artificial intelligence and machine learning and the avalanche of open source information in today's world creates new opportunities for our analysts. When harnessed properly, AI can find patterns and trends in vast amounts of open source and clandestinely acquired data that the human mind can't, freeing up our officers to focus on what they do best, providing reasoned judgments and insights on what matters most to policymakers and what means most for our interests. Our adversaries are moving fast to exploit open source information, and we have to do it faster and better than they do. Another key priority, and my most profound responsibility as director, is to invest in the people of our agency. While mastery of emerging technologies will shape our future in many ways, it is the remarkable men and women at the heart of CIA who will always drive it forward. They've been operating at an incredible tempo for more than 2 decades, since the terrible attacks of 9/11, and we're determined to provide them the support they need and deserve. We've completely revamped our in-house medical team, sent more medical officers out to the field, strengthened programs for families and 2 career couples, and appointed our first ever chief well-being officer. We're also looking for more ways to attract and retain technological talent, improving pay packages and encouraging more flexible career patterns so that officers can move into the private sector and later return to CIA. We're also making progress toward a more diverse workforce, taking full advantage of the richness of American society. For an intelligence service stretched across a very diverse world, that is not only the right thing to do for Americans, but also the smart thing. This past year, we reached historic highs in hiring women and minority officers. Perhaps even more importantly, we promoted into our senior ranks the highest percentages of women and minority officers in our 75-year history. Our final priority in this new era is to deepen our intelligence partnerships around the world and renew our commitment to intelligence diplomacy. At its core, the intelligence profession is about human interactions, and there is no substitute for direct contact to deepen ties with our closest allies, communicate with our fiercest adversaries, and cultivate everyone in between. In the nearly 4 trips I've taken overseas in my 2.5 years as director, I've run the gamut of those relationships and challenges. Sometimes it's more convenient for intelligence officers to navigate difficult terrain or deal with historic enemies where diplomatic contact might connote formal recognition. That's why the president sent me to Kabul in late August of 2021 to engage the Taliban leadership just prior to our final withdrawal. Sometimes intelligence ties can provide ballast in relationships full of political ups and downs. And sometimes intelligence diplomacy can encourage convergence of interests, support the efforts of policymakers and diplomats, and enhance competitive advantages. Our allies from the Five Eyes network to our other treaty partners across NATO and the Indo-Pacific are the bedrock of our intelligence diplomacy. No relationship is stronger or more trusting than our alliance with Britain and SIS. That's a point that my friend C and I have reinforced to our workforces in 2 unusual joint town hall discussions in recent months in Langley and in Vauxhall. I've experienced that reality ever since I trudged up to Ditchley Park from the Oxford bus all those years ago. I saw it as a diplomat in our collaboration with British diplomats and intelligence officers to persuade Muammar Gaddafi to get out of the business of terrorism and give up his rudimentary nuclear program. An adventure full of strange meetings in the middle of the night, in the middle of the desert with Gaddafi, to this day the strangest leader I've ever met. I saw it during secret nuclear talks with the Iranians and in the tangled dangers of Iraq and Afghanistan. And I saw that remarkable intelligence partnership in the run-up to Putin's war in Ukraine, where it got a little lonely for the two of us, way out on a limb in our public predictions of the coming storm. It is comforting to face this transformed world together and to learn from one another as we transform our services. And it is truly an honor to highlight that partnership here at Ditchley, where so much of the transatlantic spirit found its spark. Thank you so much.